Assalamu alaikum. My name is Salih Al-Azmi, environmentalist from HSC Group, Environment and Corporate Social Responsibility Team. The United Nations has proclaimed May 22 the International Day for Biological Diversity to increase the understanding and awareness of biodiversity issue as part of KIPIC commitment to the environment. And on behalf of KIPIC management, I would like to welcome Dr. Mohammed Al-Sayegh. He is an assistant professor at Science Department, College of Basic Education, the Public Authority for Applied Education and Training. He is an official representative of the Climate Action Network Arab World in Kuwait. Also, he is an ecological and environmental consultant and researcher. Dr. Mohammed, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Saleh. It's been a hectic 5 minutes or 15 minutes that we had previously trying to set up this interesting meeting. I would like to also take this opportunity to thank Kuwait Integrated Petroleum Industries Company, KIPIC, for inviting me on this day to present on the importance of biodiversity and the celebration that the United Nations commit every year for this occasion. I would like to extend my thanks to Mrs. Hanan Al-Qana'i, head of the Environment and Corporate Social Responsibility team. And I would like to thank you all for attending this talk today, and hopefully it's going to be an interactive, interesting talk that everyone would benefit from. Let's jump into it. I'll go ahead and maybe close the my camera to allow for faster streaming of the presentation. So before we jump into the biodiversity day per se, let's go back to the basics. Let's talk about the definition of biodiversity. What's biodiversity? Where the term came from, and what's the importance of biodiversity? So biodiversity is an abbreviation for biological diversity. Biodiversity is the biological variety and variability of life on Earth. So the biodiversity is the variety of all the life forms on Earth, as defined in the Convention on Biological Diversity, which was signed in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, in the year 1992 by 154 countries. The biodiversity defined as the variability among living organisms from all sources, including inter alia, terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, including but not limited to humans. Biodiversity as a word is a measure for variation at the genetic, species, and ecosystem levels. So all these definitions are complementary to each other. None can survive by themselves. All of them need to complete the other in order for the whole biodiversity to commit to its services to Earth in general. Biodiversity includes not only species we consider rare, threatened, or endangered, but also every living organism, from humans to organisms that we discovered yesterday. The types of biodiversity, 3 types. As we mentioned in the previous slide, there are 3 types of biodiversity for species, ecosystems, and genes. When we speak of species biodiversity, we are trying to deliver the message that species diversity refers to the number of different species that are represented in a given community. So, for example, how many monkeys there are, how many birds there are, how many fishes of a certain type there are. All these fall under the diversity of species. Now, when we talk about ecosystem diversity, we definitely deals with the variations in ecosystems within a geographical location. Meaning, let's talk about Kuwait. We have the marine ecosystem. We have the desert ecosystem. These are the main two ecosystems in Kuwait. And then when we go to the marine ecosystem per se, we have the coral reefs ecosystem, which is a sub-ecosystem of the main ecosystem of the marine. We have the islands ecosystem, which is a mixture between terrestrial and marine. What kind of species lives there? Following this, the other ecosystems in the whole world: major, minor, micro, and overall. When we describe the diversity of genes or when we talk about genes biodiversity, we talk about the genetic diversity and the total number of genetic characteristics and the genetic markup of a single species. It ranges widely from the number of species to differences within species and can be attributed to the span of survival of a species of a certain type. This is all science. These are all fall under the biodiversity and the research of biodiversity. So we described the types of biodiversity, we defined what's biodiversity, but what we need to know exactly are why biodiversity is important. There is a reason when the United Nations decided that we need to have an international day to celebrate biodiversity. There is a reason why we need to raise the awareness about biodiversity and the need for people to take care of biodiversity. It might be a big word to say biodiversity, but there is a reason for why this word is main and major. First of all, we value biodiversity for what it provides to humans. Biodiversity provides different services to humans, provide different services to the infrastructure of Earth. The services it provides for humans are many, are not limited to, but includes foods, fuel, shelter, medicine, and many others. Without the services of biodiversity, and when we talk about biodiversity and connected to the definition, we talk about the ecosystems provide services to humans, animals provide services to humans, plants provide services to humans, weather provide services to humans. All these make up the biodiversity. All of these deliver services of some kind, of somehow to the humans to make sure that the human race or the human being are serviced all the time without any problems and without any delays in the life cycle. We value biodiversity for what it provides to the environment in general. Ecosystems, for example, provide crucial services such as pollination. Without the pollination, as you all know, we will not get enough green cover, we will not get food production, plants production, vegetables, all of that, we will not get it. Also, the ecosystem provides seed dispersal. Ecosystem provides climate regulations. Otherwise, the temperatures will rise to unacceptable limits, or will fall under acceptable limits as well. Ecosystem provides water purification, nutrient cycling, and control of agricultural pests. Biodiversity also holds value for potential benefits not yet recognized. That means that we are still working on new research, still understanding the importance of biodiversity, still making new inventions that will help the human race to keep surviving the different issues that's happening on planet Earth. Some of the inventions could be related to new medicines and other possible unknown services. Biodiversity also has cultural values to humans as well, for spiritual or religious reasons, for instance. We should not overlook the cultural values, because the cultural values are part of our life, part of our raising of our new generations. From the ecosystem, we learn a lot and we benefit a lot. So we should also appreciate all these services. So when we talk about the main biodiversity benefits, we sum them up as the balance of nature, biological productivity, regulation of climate, degradation of waste, cleaning of air and water, cycling of nutrients, control of potential pest and disease, detoxification of soil and sediment, stabilizing of land against erosion, carbon sequestration and global climate change, maintenance of soil fertility. Now, if we pay attention to such benefits, some of the points that I just mentioned are being devastated by humans. And this will end up very bad in the future if we keep mismanaging the benefits of biodiversity. Biodiversity is a science by itself. Unfortunately, it's underestimated by most of the governments in the world. Even though most of the governments or the countries in the world have signed almost all the conventions on biodiversity, but still not paying a lot of attention to the rules and regulations that they need to work with, the legislations that they need to implement to further protect biodiversity and therefore protect the resources of planet Earth, which will help extending the life cycle of such resources for the benefit of humans. So, what are the threats of biodiversity? Biodiversity, is it being a threat? Threatened? What are the problems? How we can solve that? We will talk about this in the next few slides. Over the last century, humans have come to dominate the planet. As you all know, humans need to exploit the different resources on planet Earth, which caused rapid ecosystem change and massive loss of biodiversity across the planet. While the Earth has always experienced change and extinctions, today, because of the human mismanagement of the resources, these devastations, changes, and extinctions are happening at a very high and unprecedented rate. The problem with the human using the resources is that they don't care about the other stakeholders that takes part of our planet Earth. Like humans, when they use any resource, they do not think of the other species that's living on planet Earth and might be affected by the misuse of such resources. Major direct threats to biodiversity includes habitat loss and fragmentation, unsustainable resource use, invasive species, pollution, and the global climate change. The good news is that it is within our power as humans to change our action to help ensure the survival of other species, other services, other ecosystems, if we wanted to make sure that all these services stay for a longer time. What we need to do is understanding threats to biodiversity and how these threats play out in context. We can then be best prepared to manage conservation challenges and make sure that all the resources are being taken care of. The expenditure on each resource should be managed in order for the that resource to stay healthy and stay offering the services. We need to know that the conservation efforts of the last decades have made a significant differences in the state of biodiversity today. Many countries, including Kuwait, established over 100,000 protected areas, including national parks, wildlife refuge, game reserves, and marine protected areas, managed both by government and local communities. These protected areas provide habitat for wildlife and help keep deforestation in check. When protecting habitat is not enough, other types of conservation actions such as restoration, reintroduction, and the control of invasive species have had positive impacts. I remember one research that happened in Abu Dhabi in the UAE a few years back. They wanted to expand the size of their airport. Their airport in a desert area. So before they went ahead and expanded the size of the airport, they went and explored the area or the desert that they're going to expand the airport on, and they discovered a huge number of active dubs. So what they did before actually starting any procedural expansion project, what they did is they actually transported all these dubs to a different area. So they had a partnership with the University of Abu Dhabi in a scientific project. Scientifically, they removed the dubs to a different area because they appreciate the services that dubs do. The dubs, as a piece of information to all of you, the dubs is a bioengineer. The dub also work in pollination. It moves pollen between plants. and it makes houses that house too many species. So it's a very important player in biodiversity, which was appreciated by the government of Abu Dhabi, and moved them to a different area to make sure that it keeps on surviving, make sure that it keeps on giving the services that it's given. These efforts have been achieved by continuous efforts to improve environmental policies at local, regional, and global scale. Speaking of policies, we should be proud that Kuwait, one of the few countries that have a law for environment, a very specific law that makes sure that the environment in general is being protected, the environment in general is being serviced, that the biodiversity is being taken care of, to make sure that Kuwait is one of the countries that actually work on the environment. The lifestyle choices of individuals should also take into consideration biodiversity. Communities as well. I mean, this talk and this presentation today is part of our effort in raising the awareness in the community for the importance of environment in general, biodiversity specific, which can have a large effect on the impact on biodiversity and the environment. While we might not be able to prevent all negative human impacts on biodiversity, with knowledge and talks and presentations and extra efforts being paid by the individuals and being paid by establishments such as KIPIC, we can work to change the direction and shape of our effects on the rest of life on the planet Earth. And here where awareness initiatives such as the Biodiversity Day, the International Biodiversity Day, comes into play. So what is the Biodiversity Day, which the whole world celebrate on May 22nd? The International Biodiversity Day comes into the picture as an annual international project supported by the United Nations to increase the awareness about the importance of biodiversity and the services it provides to Earth in general and to human race in specific. The International Day for Biological Diversity, or Biodiversity, is an official United Nations International Day for the promotion and raising awareness of biodiversity issues. It's currently held on May 22nd of every year. The International Day for Biodiversity falls within the scope of the United Nations post-2015 of the Development Agenda's Sustainable Development Goals. This year's theme, personally, I think is very interesting. This year's theme says we're part of the solution, which is very interesting. It's an indirect way saying that we, the humans, are part of the solution. The way I interpret it, it's an interesting approach, as this year being very transparent. It recognizes an indirect way that the causes of all issues affecting biodiversity is humans. We are the problem, we realize it, and finally we would like to be part of the solution. Very transparent. Very nice. It was written very nicely. It's a very strong message sent by the United Nations to the whole world that we understand that up until this point, we have been part of the problem, but it's time for us now to raise and become the solution. We destroyed it, we will fix it. So what are the issues on biodiversity that the United Nations is trying to raise? There are many issues. Could be daily issues. Let's highlight some of them. Some 75% of the genetic diversity of crop plants have been lost in the past century. This is a very dangerous statement. If this rate keeps on happening for the future, we will end up in a very bad situation. The main source of food is green planets, green plants. Without the first level of vegetation, we will not be able to survive, because all the living organisms on the planet Earth, they depend on vegetation for food. Even the animals that only eat meat, they eat animals that eat vegetation. So without the vegetation, so the second level of food will not be available, the third level of food will not be available, and the extinction will start happening, and the life on Earth will end in a very short time. Scientists estimated that as many as 3 species per hour are going extinct, and 20,000 extinction are expected to occur each year. That's another very dangerous statement, which will affect humans directly this time. Humans are dependent on vegetation and dependent on animals for food. Without food, the extinction of humans will be very high in rate. So if we lose 20,000 species a year, in a few years, we will end up losing all the species on planet Earth. This is where the importance of taking care of biodiversity comes into place. This is why we need to take care of biodiversity. This is why this presentation and this talk have been put together to make sure that we send a clear message that biodiversity is a very important aspect of our lives that we need to focus on, shed some light on it to make sure that things are put back into perspective and things are being taken care of for the not only for ourselves now, but the future of our children and the next generation. Roughly 1/3 of the world coral reefs systems have been destroyed or highly degraded. This we can see clearly happening in Kuwait. For the people who go to sea trips to the islands in Kuwait, especially Kubbar. Kubbar Island has one of the best coral reefs in the world that have been degraded in the last few years because of the trips that people go to Kubbar and destroy the coral reefs. A small information about coral reefs. Coral reefs are the places where fish in general lay their eggs and introduce new generations. So what's happening in coral reefs worldwide is not acceptable. We need more government protection. We need to raise the awareness of people on why coral reefs are very important, because they provide services to humans by being a shelter to different kind of fishes during the egg laying season. About 24% of mammals and 12% of bird species are currently considered to be globally threatened. Also, a very important aspect that we need to raise awareness about. Personally, because I go out to different protected areas to conduct research and do surveys, I can confirm personally with my own eyes that there are a lot of people, irresponsible people, who get illegally into the protected areas in Kuwait to practice the recreational hunting of birds, mammals, and lizards. This is not acceptable. The protected areas in Kuwait and any other world are being put there for a reason. We should respect that. We should keep the different animals intact without interfering with their daily life routine in order for us to protect biodiversity and then protect our own good by making the resources available all the time. More than 50% of the world's wetlands have been drained, and populations of inland water and wetland species have declined by 50% between the year 1970 and 1999. This also tells us that not only in Kuwait, but all over the world, there are some kind of issues happening for the biodiversity. So it wasn't a coincidence that the United Nations announced the 22nd of May to be the International Biodiversity Day. This to implement a new culture for the whole human race, that biodiversity is the reason why we still exist until today. Without biodiversity, there are no services. Without services, there are no human race anymore. So what are the international conventions to maintain biodiversity? Governments, United Nations, and a lot of different establishments have recognized the importance of biodiversity, that they recognize the importance of the different species, they recognize the importance of why we should maintain biodiversity, and therefore a lot of international conventions have been placed, and most of the countries, including Kuwait, have signed on these conventions and worked hard to implement what came into these conventions in order to protect and maintain the biodiversity. The first one of them is the Convention on Biological Diversity. The objective of the CBD, the Convention of Biological Diversity, are the conservation of biological diversity, the sustainable use of its component, and the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from commercial and other utilization of genetic resources. The agreement covers all ecosystems, species, and genetic resources, and have been signed by almost all the countries in the world. This is the first one. The second one, Convention of International Trade, Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, which is CITES. Kuwait signed this convention. It aims to ensure the international trade in specimen of wild animals and plants does not threaten their survival. Through its three appendices, the convention accords varying degrees of protection of more than 30,000 plants and animal species. In Kuwait, it's very hard to trade in such fauna and flora because Kuwait takes it seriously to protect the endangered species. The third one is Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, or the CMS. It aims to conserve terrestrial, marine, and avian migratory species throughout the range. Parties to the CMS work together to conserve migratory species and their habitats by providing strict protection, even here in Kuwait, for the most endangered migratory species by concluding regional multilateral agreements for the conservation and management of species or categories of species, and by undertaking cooperative research and conservation activities. Fourth one is the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. The objective are the conservation and sustainable use of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, and the fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of their use, in harmony with the conservation of biological diversity for sustainable agriculture and food security. The treaty covers all plant genetics resources for food and agriculture, whilst multilateral system for access and benefits sharing covers a specific list of 64 crops and forages. The treaty also includes provisions on farmers' rights. This treaty have been established here in Kuwait, but needs more work on implementation. Then we have the Convention on Wetlands. It's famously known as Ramsar. The Ramsar Convention provides the framework for national action and international cooperation for the conservation of and wise use of wetlands and their resources. The convention covers all aspects of wetlands conservation and wise use, recognizing the wetlands as ecosystems that are extremely important for biodiversity, conservation in general, and for the well-being of human communities. Then we have the World Heritage Convention. The primary mission of the WHC is to identify and conserve the world cultural and natural heritage by drawing up a list of sites whose outstanding values should be preserved for all humanities, and to ensure their protection through a closer cooperation among nations. Why this convention is listed under the biodiversity conventions? Because, as we mentioned earlier, culture and heritage are part of biodiversity. Culture and heritage they include species that are part of the culture. They include the species, plants and animals that part of some of the cultures, and therefore must be protected, must be appreciated, because it affects the direct lives of a lot of people. After that, we have International Plants Protection Convention, IPPC. which aims to protect world plant resources, including cultivated and wild plants, by preventing the introduction and spread of plant pests and promoting the appropriate measures for their control. The convention provides the mechanisms to develop the international standards for phytosanitary measures and to help countries to implement the ISMPs and the other obligations under the IPPC by facilitating the national capacity development, national reporting, and dispute settlement. Last but not least, the International Whaling Commission, IWC, which is all about providing the proper conservation of whales stock and thus making possible the orderly development of the whaling industry, because there are some countries hunt whales for trade purposes, which is affecting the life cycle and the abundance of the species in the oceans. These are few of the many biodiversity conventions. These could be the international ones, the recognized ones, but that doesn't mean that each country has its own way to protect and maintain biodiversity. In general, what are the international efforts that the countries overall are doing to maintain biodiversity? One of the efforts is the biodiversity inventories, which Kuwait is one of the biggest countries that takes care of this kind of effort. Biodiversity inventories is an attempt to document and identify all biological species living in some defined area. Actually, I am part of the current program that's being conducted between the IUCN and the EPA here in Kuwait, the Environment Public Authority, to document all sort of species living in Kuwait, all the native species, marine and terrestrial. So there is a huge project going on now. It's the second round, and it's been handled by the Kuwait Environmental Authority, representing the government and the IUCN, in a direct show of effort that Kuwait is doing to document, to support the international effort in maintaining biodiversity. So biodiversity inventories are important because it helps identifying all the native species and thus help us put all the proper plans to conserve them and make sure that they survive, to keep developing the biodiversity and keep on providing the services that they give. The second effort, which Kuwait also participate in heavily, excuse me, which is the natural reserved and protected areas, which is a protected and managed piece of lands for various ecological reasons. It could be designated to protect and reserve wildlife, flora, fauna, geological features, or other special interests that plays a part in our ecosystems and earth and biodiversity in general. Habitats that has its flora and fauna near endangerment are of the particular concern. They are often protected and conserved in natural reserves to prevent them from extinction. Excuse me, and also to provide study, research, and natural appreciation opportunities. Another interesting effort is the seeds and gene banks. A seed bank or gene bank is a place where seeds are stored to preserve genetic diversity for the future, especially in the case of catastrophes or wars or any natural disasters that could erase the green cover from any country. These banks are usually flood proof, bomb proof, radiation proof, holding the jars of seeds from all over the world for a lot of different plant species to protect them and to keep them in a safe place. A seed bank is a form of insurance, a way of maximizing the number of plant species we can save from extinction. What happened in Syria a few years ago after the war, most of the farms have been destroyed and devastated. It was very difficult for the farmers there to reestablish their farms because they ran out of the seeds. So what happened is that they requested their seeds that have been stored in one of the seeds bank to be transported back, and this what happened. They got access to these seeds and they established their farms again, and now they're in a better situation. We do have the DNA banks and the pollen banks. What are the pollen banks? Are used to store pollen in suitable environments for a very long time. The pollen is stored for the preferred breeding season. Just like the seeds bank, pollen banks are mainly used to protect pollen from the different disasters. Further efforts needed to maintain biodiversity, environmental education, which is the process that allows individuals to explore environmental issues, engage in problem solving, and take action to improve the environment. As a result, individuals develop a deeper understanding of environmental issues and have the skills to make informed and responsible decisions. Personally, I think environmental education is a very essential aspect to be taken into consideration by most countries, and I am hoping through this talk to send a message to the Kuwait government to include environmental education within the curriculum for the students in primary education stages to help build environmental culture, environmental enthusiasm in our young generations, to help this culture grow up with them, and then we can have a whole generation who is well educated about environment, about the services of the environment, about the importance of biodiversity, without the need from us to increase the awareness. Same message I would like to send about environmental laws, which is a collective term, encompasses aspect of law that provide protection to environment. We're very lucky in Kuwait to have the environmental law intact, in place, and being implemented by the public authority and the environmental public authority in Kuwait, which is, by the way, doing an excellent job in protecting the environment and educating people about the importance of the biodiversity. We also need to review the agricultural practices. These are the principles that farmers use to produce agricultural product. They need to be reviewed all the time to make sure that the best practices are used, which will help protecting the long-term services of the environment without affecting production. Because, as you know, many farmers in Kuwait and outside Kuwait, they might be using excessive amounts of pest controlling products, chemicals, which might affect not only the production but also the soil, which is connected to many different species, which might be affected in the long term if we keep on using such controlling material. So we'll try to increase the speed. For this talk, it took almost an hour now, but we'll try to jump in faster into these slides. Let's focus now. I mean, we talked about the international efforts. We talked about the definition of biodiversity, but let's talk today. I mean, now about Kuwait's effort to maintain biodiversity. Few quick notes that Kuwait signed the Convention on Biodiversity in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, along with 155 other countries. In 1998, Kuwait released its first national biodiversity strategy, which we're really proud of, which states that the primary cause of biodiversity depletion in Kuwait are gaps and weaknesses in policy, legislation, and institutional responsibility. This is a very strong and transparent statement that comes from the government, which released that strategy. It also states that this has allowed widespread habitat destruction or alteration of critical and fragile habitats, uncontrolled development, excessive grazing and fishing pressure, uncontrolled hunting, and the uncontrolled use of agrochemicals, the ones that we talked about a few minutes ago. This has largely come about because of increase in the population and the social and economical changes. By signing the convention in 1992, Kuwait has acknowledged the value of biological resources, has acknowledged the reasons behind the cause of biodiversity depletion in Kuwait, and integrated part its natural heritage with the potential of yielding long-term benefits for human welfare and the essential foundation for sustained economical development. So what does the strategy and overall goals of the biodiversity strategy says? Biodiversity protection, it encompasses the protection, restoration, sustainable and equitable use, and the systemic investigation and monitoring of Kuwait's biodiversity. As the strategy covers so many issues and interests, no single agency or management tool can expect to meet all the objectives of biodiversity conservation. The effective implementation of the strategy excuse me, will depend upon a high level of political support, the integration and harmonization of sectoral policies, legislation, as well as effective coordination between government agencies, non-government agencies, and the people of Kuwait, which is an excellent statement. The overall goal of this national strategy is to protect Kuwait's biological diversity in the natural, modified, and cultivated systems, maintaining ecological processes, and foster the sustainable use of these resources for the benefit of the present and the future generations. What are the specific what are the general strategies that Kuwait is implementing? First of all, documenting Kuwait's native species, like the project that I just told you about that I'm working on, developing a comprehensive understanding and documentation of Kuwait's biological diversity, and ensure its continuous characterization and monitoring. Number 2, planning to promote the local biodiversity, institute ecological approaches to national socio-economic planning and management based on the current knowledge of how ecosystem function to prevent or mitigate adverse impacts and their causes. Managing the local biodiversity by strengthening institutional capacities for coordinated management and conservation of Kuwait's biodiversity, particularly by improving integrated policy making, developing and enforcing legislative arrangements, and monitoring of compliance. Managing Kuwait's biological resources by reviewing the present use of all biological resources in Kuwait to determine the socio-economic incentives which will foster such use within sustainable limits, particularly in key resources-based sectors such as agriculture and fisheries. Valuing the biodiversity in general, introduce socio-economic measures to reflect the true value of biodiversity in order to encourage conservation and sustainable use for scarce biological resources, discourage waste and pollution, and stimulate biodiversity sensitive activities. Now, what are the steps that actually the Kuwait took to conserve biodiversity? Protected areas and natural reserves, established an adequate, representative and ecologically viable system for protected areas in the terrestrial and marine environments of Kuwait for conserving endangered fauna and flora, protecting and promoting biodiversity outside the protected areas, maintain wild flora and fauna across all Kuwait's ecosystems by enhancing efforts to conserve and where necessary rehabilitate, restore injured biological resources where there's naturally. Building capacity for biodiversity conservation, educating the community about the importance of biodiversity issues, participating in international efforts. Before we end this presentation, I would like to recommend some individual and corporate roles in protecting the biodiversity of Kuwait. First of all, I would recommend supporting all the national biodiversity strategies by maybe protecting the native species, not hunting the native species, not killing the animals, not overgrazing the green cover. Number 2, this is an extended invitation to KIPIC, which is doing an excellent job in the environment effort. Why not establishing the KIPIC Natural Reserve? This would be an excellent step, given that KIPIC is already have establishments closer to the native environment, which is the desert. It would be nice to have a small natural reserve to promote and grow native plants and protect some of the reptiles that are known to be native to Kuwait. These environmental awareness courses and talks that's been supported by KIPIC and other establishments are well welcomed to increase the awareness level of the importance of biodiversity. Again and again, we would like to always remind to start with the children and youth in building a culture that is based on biodiversity, environment, and how to promote it. Unfortunately, we don't have time to view this video, This video talks about the or shows the different protected areas in Kuwait, like in Jahra Reserve, Sabah Al Ahmed Reserve. But maybe we can share it later on through the internal messaging system. So what's the take-home message today? Biodiversity is our life. If the biodiversity got lost at this rate, then in near future, the survival of a human being will be threatened. So it is our moral duty to conserve biodiversity as well as our environment. Long-term maintenance of species and their management requires cooperative efforts across the entire landscape. Biodiversity should be dealt with at the scale of habitat or systems rather than at the species level. I would like to thank you very much for attending this talk today. I would like to thank KIPIC for giving me the opportunity to be part of this talk today. And of course, if anyone has any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer the questions. Otherwise, thank you very much and looking forward to work with you again in future project.
Yeah,
Saleh, back to you.
First, I would like to thank you, Doctor, for this informative presentation and the valuable presentation. Doctor, how long is the video that you have?
It's 3 minutes. 3 minutes.
I think we can start, and then we move on to the question.
Okay.
Yes, it will be better. Thank you. Doctor, does this video has audio or? Because you cannot hear the audio if the video has audio.
Yeah, there is an audio. I don't know how to. I don't know how to connect because I can hear the audio. You know what? Let's skip it for now. Let's skip it for now.
Okay.
I'll send it to you later. Maybe you can send it to the.
Okay, we can share it then with the others. Doctor, we have a question here.
Yes.
Is it mandatory to carry out a critical habitat assessment for new projects in Kuwait?
Definitely, it's very important. As I mentioned in the talk, the Abu Dhabi, when they decided to expand their airport, they had to do an assessment. So they wanted to see if the actually this is a huge study that's been published for the Abu Dhabi airport. They needed to see the benefits and the bad aspects of expanding the airport, and they found that they will destroy the native habitat of doves. So what they did, because they needed to expand the airport, there was no other solution other than destroying the habitat. At least they transplant the doves to another native species within the country. So to answer this question in a different way, even though we might not be able to avoid urbanization or the entry into the native species, into the native habitats for human uses, what we can do is actually at least study the effect, the environmental effect on the area, and try to transplant the native species into another area, not completely destroy it. These are the reasons why the environmental assessment studies are there, to manage the actual benefits and the bad aspects of any urbanization project. I hope I answered this question.
Yeah, I think it is clear. Another question, Doctor, from the attendee. What is the most threatened on biodiversity in Kuwait?
The most threatened, number one, is the green cover. What I have been seeing in my own eyes, especially in protected areas, the owners for camels and sheep, what they do is that they force their camels and sheep into the protected areas for the goal of overgrazing. So the main issue here in Kuwait is overgrazing by livestock. Overgrazing is a major problem because depleting the green cover, as I mentioned before, will lower the amount of native food for other smaller species, which are depending on these natural resources for food. At the same time, they give very important services to the environment. So if they go extinct because of the lack of food, we will lose their services, which will affect our environment. Just a small note for everyone, the desert doesn't mean that's the degraded area. By the way, the desert must be a green area. It has its own green cover, but what we see now is a desertification. The desertification is when we degrade any environment from its own native species in general, and green cover in specific.
It's very clear, Doctor. Another question, Doctor. What was the effect of the red tide on marine diversity in Kuwait Bay?
What's the question again? Sorry.
What was the effect of red tide on marine diversity in Kuwait Bay?
Okay, so red tides. Let's divide the environmental problems into two aspects: natural disasters or natural problems, and human issues. So the natural disasters or natural pollutions usually comes in a way that is the actual environmental system is being able to clean itself, or it comes into a situation where it's natural for the ecosystem to have such problem to clean up the cycle of the system itself. So the red tides, if it happened because of a natural cause, then it's a no problem because it happened for a reason. The problem comes when the humans do the pollution, throwing plastic, the oil sometimes goes into the water, the sewage system goes into the water. This has a negative effect that's much higher than the red tides. I would recommend, or I would say that the red tides is a part of the natural life cycle of any of the marine system. We shouldn't be worried about it because the system will clean itself, and it happens for a reason. It will clean the system from a specific species that the system doesn't need during that time span.
يعطيك العافية دكتور. Doctor, is there any cooperation with other government ministries and authority like to recycle the sewage and increase the green area in Kuwait?
Since 5 years ago, the Environmental Public Authority released the environmental law, which have been approved by the government and the cabinet of Majlis Al-Ummah, and it's been in effect since 5 years ago. I can assure that the Environmental Public Authority is doing an excellent job in connecting private and public sectors into protecting the biodiversity. The law is there. The awareness is not there. So through the different channels, like today's presentation, maybe the media, the public authority will hopefully raise the awareness, because as we mentioned earlier, this is not a single entity job. This is a collaborative project. Each one of us, even on the individual level, needs to participate into helping the environment, helping the public authority, helping the government into bringing the benefits of biodiversity in general, protecting the environment in specific. So yes, government is working through the Environmental Public Authority, but the effect might take time until we start seeing some positive results, because what happened before is a catastrophe, disastrous. The cleaning will take time.
Thank you, Doctor. I think we will conclude with the last question. How can we access the documented biodiversity detail of the species of Kuwait? Is it available to public for reference?
It is available. It is available, and I'll be more than happy to share some of the documents with you, Saleh, and you can put it on the website or send it to whoever is interested.
In conclusion, I would like to thank Dr. Mohammed Al-Sayegh for the informative presentation, and I would like to thank you all for attending this session. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Actually, I would like to thank all the attendees today, and I would like to thank them for the interactive, excellent questions that they sent toward me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. يعطيك العافية دكتور.
الله يعافيك. شكرا جزيلا. شكرا. مع السلامة.